Pick a scene. Hello, my name is Regina Cuellar, and I am a commissioner on the state of Haight, and I also serve as the tribal chairwoman of the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians, a federally recognized tribe located in El Dorado County. On behalf of the Commission on the state of Haight, I welcome you today to our first community forum. Closed captioning is available for this meeting. The closed captions can be displayed in English or another language. If you prefer to view an automated live transcript of the meeting in another language, including Spanish, Chinese, Korean, or Vietnamese. To display closed captions on your screen, please do the following. Click the button labeled Show Captions at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you'd like to display captions in another language, select the box at the bottom of the window labeled Enable Translation. You will see a window with the heading, You've enabled translation, at the top. Select English as a speaking language and select your preferred language in the second menu. Click Save. Automated captions in your selected language should start appearing at the bottom of the Zoom window. We do have a Spanish interpreter on the call available to translate public comments during the public comment periods. I would like to take this time to introduce my fellow commissioner, Commissioner Filer, who will be helping conduct today's forum. Commissioner Filer, please introduce yourself.
Welcome, everyone. We're very excited to have our first public forum. I was appointed by Speaker Anthony Rendon. I am currently on the Los Angeles Jewish Federation Board. I'm also the vice chair of the UCLA Resnick Neuropsychiatric Advisory Board. And I am also the child of 2 Holocaust survivors, immigrants to our great state, California, and feel that that background has influenced who I am and has also pushed me into or wanting me to be on this commission to do what we can to fight the state of hate. So thank you. And I'll turn it back over to Commissioner Cuellar.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Filer. I'd also like to note that we also have other commissioners with us today. I'd like to take this time if they could introduce themselves. I'd call on Commissioner Damsky.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Andrea Beth Damsky. I live in the San Diego area. I am active in anti-Semitism politics and LGBTQ plus politics as a senior member of the LGBTQ plus community. And I'm happy to be here today and welcome you to our first public forum.
Thank you, Commissioner Damsky. Next, I'd like to call on Commissioner Sinar.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Shireen Sinar, and I teach at Stanford Law School. I do research on hate crimes law, among other things. I began my career as a civil rights lawyer, working on post 9/11 discrimination facing the Arab, South Asian, and Muslim communities. Very good to be here.
Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to call on Commissioner Suthers.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Errol Suthers. I'm an administrator and professor at the University of Southern California. My area of expertise is extremist violence and counterterrorism. I also serve in the Los Angeles Police Commission as a veteran of 3 law enforcement agencies, and I serve on the subcommittee for the Commission on Recommendations for Law Enforcement. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Commissioner Suthers. And last but not least, we also have our Commissioner Levin, who is also going to be doing a presentation for us later. Commissioner Levin, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Professor Brian Levin, soon to retire from the directorship of the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism, a nonprofit educational entity that is now going on its 24th year. And I've been involved in the passage of every major federal hate crime law and a lot of the ones in California, but I'm most proud of the first thing I did as an attorney was represent a bunch of California groups, particularly LGBTQI groups, to affirm the constitutionality of hate crime laws. So really looking forward to taking some of this research, which I started over 35 years ago, and talking about trends today. But The biggest thrill here is if you look at the other commissioners, if you look at the staff of the Civil Rights Department, when you put that, leaving myself out, when you put that kind of talent together and you see the different motivations and perspectives, it's a wonderful thing. And ladies and gentlemen, you are viewing the best of California. And again, I'm Professor Brian Levin, he, him.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Levin. Thank you for that. And again, thank you for all the commissioners that are here today joining us. And thank you for introducing yourselves. I'd like to go into the public comment process. The commission is a public body, and an important part of being a public body is hearing from the public. To that end, this meeting is open to the public, and there will be opportunities for public comments throughout the meeting today. To keep an orderly meeting, please make sure to comment only on the agenda item under consideration. If you have comments that are not specifically related to an agenda item, please save your comment for agenda item 5 titled Public Comment on Items Not on the Agenda. To submit a written public comment, email the commission at csh@calcivilrights.ca.gov. We will put that email address in the chat as well. We will be monitoring this channel throughout the meeting. If you submit a written comment that pertains to an agenda item, we will read it aloud or summarize it when the public comment portion of that agenda item is open and before any vote. If the comment is not about a specific agenda item, we will read it aloud or summarize it at the end of the meeting during agenda item 6, titled Public Comment on Items Not on the Agenda. If you would like to speak at the meeting to deliver your public comment, you will have the opportunity to do so during the public comment portions of the meeting. You may request to speak on an agenda item by raising your hand on Zoom. If you're joining on a computer, you can raise your hand by pressing the raise hand button on the bottom of your screen. If you are on the phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9 during the public comment portion. We will call on attendees who raised their hands to allow them to unmute and deliver comments. In the interest of time, we will limit verbal public comments to 3 minutes per person. Thank you. Okay. Next, I'd like to talk about the Commission's goals. The Commission's goal is to strengthen California's efforts to stop hate and promote mutual respect among California's diverse population. The Commission has been tasked with developing recommendations for preventing and responding to hate activity in the state, engaging in research on hate activity, increasing awareness of state of hate through public forums and collaborations, and advising local governments, the governor, the legislature, and communities on how to prevent and respond to hate activity. The goal of the forum today is to listen and learn from you, the community, the public. We want to hear from you about what your community needs, your concerns, and ideas on how we can help stop hate in your community. Your input today is invaluable and will help us shape policies and make recommendations to the governor, local governments, and the legislature. We also want to share information and inform you of the resources that are available as of today. So I'll be going over the agenda. We have 6 items on the agenda today. For agenda item number 2, we will be having informational presentations on the state of hate. We have 2 presentations under agenda item number 2. The first one is a changing threat and invisible records. The second one is righting wrongs, how civil rights can protect Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. We actually will be correcting this on the agenda. The first presentation will be how civil rights can protect Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. So we will need to change that on the agenda. The third agenda item we have is informational presentations on options and resources for people targeted for hate. The first presentation is Know Your Rights and Options if targeted on hate. The second one will be resources available to people targeted for hate. The fourth agenda item is facilitating public comment and discussion. And the fifth is public comment on items not on the agenda. And the 6th agenda item is adjournment. Okay, and with that, I'll go ahead and move to agenda item number 2, informational presentations on the state of hate. The first presentation will be Righting Wrongs on How Civil Rights Can Protect Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, presented by Candace Cho and Annie Lee. Candace Cho is the Managing Director of Policy and Counsel at AAPI Equity Alliance. AAPI Equity is a Los Angeles-based coalition of over 40 community-based organizations serving Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and one of the co-founding partners of Stop AAPI Hate. Candace brings over a dozen years of experience leading policy efforts at the federal, state, and local levels. As Deputy Chief of Staff of the New York City's Law Department, she served as the city's Chief Legal Advisor on immigration, advising on sanctuary city laws and suing the federal government to protect immigrant New Yorkers during the Trump administration. She was also Chief of Staff to NYC Commission, whose proposals to increase democratic participation in local government were approved by the voters. She began her career as a legislative staffer for U.S. Senator Richard J. Durbin, the second highest ranking Democrat in the state. Candace is a graduate of Harvard College, Georgetown University's McCourt School of Public Policy, and Columbia Law School. Annie Lee is the Managing Director of Policy at Chinese for Affirmative Action, a co-founding partner of Stop AAPI Hate. At Chinese for Affirmative Action, Annie advocates for systemic change that protects workers and immigrants' rights, promotes language diversity and education equity, and remedies racial and social injustice. Annie previously worked as a civil rights attorney with the U.S. Department of Education in the Office for Civil Rights and enforced the federal civil rights laws that protect students from discrimination. Annie began her legal career as an Equal Justice Works Fellow at the National Center for Youth Law, where she specialized in foster and youth education rights, special education, and school discipline. Her passion for serving students stems from her experience as an 11th grade United States history teacher in the Bronx. Annie is a graduate of Harvard Law School, Fordham's Graduate School of Education, and the University of Pennsylvania. I'd like to welcome both the ladies today. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, for that kind introduction. Hello, everyone. Happy Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. My name is Candace Cho. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Managing Director of Policy and Counsel at AAPI Equity Alliance in Los Angeles. I'm joined today by my colleague Annie Lee, Managing Director of Policy at Chinese for Affirmative Action. We are so grateful to the Commission for the opportunity to present at today's community forum, and to every member of the public who is joining us virtually. You are really putting the community in community forum. So today, Annie and I are going to share with you what we've learned about discrimination faced by Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in California and nationwide, and what that tells us about the policy solutions that we need to address this hate. Discrimination is hate, and discrimination against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders is anti-AAPI hate. Now, before we dive in, we wanted to give you a little background about Stop AAPI Hate if you don't know us already. So we were founded in March 2020 by three partners, AAPI Equity Alliance, Chinese for Affirmative Action, and San Francisco State University's Asian American Studies Department in March 2020 at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic and the rise in anti-Asian hate. We've become the leading aggregator of self-reported hate incidents and hate crimes against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders nationwide. We're on a mission to end race-based hate against our communities and all communities of color. And critically, our coalition defines hate broadly. Hate is both the most high-profile hate crimes that we see in the news, but also other forms of bias-motivated harm that cause us to feel less safe, like verbal harassment in the streets or discrimination at work. It's also interpersonal, meaning that it happens between individuals, and systemic and structural, such as our racist immigration laws or the historic public disinvestment in our communities. Now, why do we define hate in such a broad way? It's because this is what our communities are telling us and reporting to us. So we want to take a closer look at what they're saying. So we're going to be sharing a lot of data for the next few minutes, and it's important for all of us to remember that behind each number, behind each data point, is a person who's been targeted for hate and chosen to share their story with us. So here are 3 stories we've received, and let's take about 30 seconds to read them. Thank you. Now, these are just three of the 11,000 reports that Stop AAPI Hate has received since March 2020 from all 50 states and the District of Columbia. 40% of the reports we've received are from California. And we also know that this is the tip of the iceberg. We did some survey work with the Edelman intelligence and data firm in 2021, in which 1 in 5 Asian Americans and 1 in 5 Pacific Islanders reported experiencing hate during the first year of the pandemic. And that translates to millions of reports of being victims of hate. Now, we've also learned from the communities who report to us that an overwhelming majority of the hate that we're experiencing is non-criminal. In other words, it doesn't involve the kind of behavior that would constitute a crime under federal or state law. Instead, it's things like verbal harassment in the street or on the bus or subway. It's being bullied in school. It's being discriminated against at work and in businesses. We've also learned that a majority of the hate takes place in public and in person while we're going about our everyday lives, going for a walk or run in our neighborhood, shopping for groceries, or taking the bus to work. So we noticed when we were looking through our data that some APIs were sharing stories of being discriminated against in a way that's already illegal. As you heard, both Annie and I are attorneys. So we got curious. And to better understand what we were seeing in our data, we commissioned NORC at the University of Chicago, a nonpartisan and independent research organization, to conduct a nationally representative survey of Asian American and Pacific Islander adults on discrimination and civil rights. This survey was administered in November and December of 2022 in English, Chinese, Vietnamese, and Korean to a panel that reflected the diversity of those who fall under the AAPI umbrella, folks from South, Southeast Asian, East Asian, and Pacific Islanders descent. This survey also asked people about their experiences with discrimination and reporting that discrimination, as well as their awareness of and attitudes towards civil rights. And now I'm pleased to introduce my colleague Annie to talk more about the survey results in California.
Thank you so much, Candace. So what did we find when we issued this survey? We found that 4 in 10 Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in California have experienced illegal discrimination. And when we asked them for the basis of that discrimination, the vast majority, 8 in 10, said that they experienced discrimination based on their race, ethnicity, national origin, skin color, or language. More than a third also cited sex, gender, or gender identity or expression as the basis for the discrimination they experienced. And nearly 1 in 5 identified religion or immigration status as the protected basis for which they were discriminated against. We also asked folks, where did you experience the discrimination? And almost half, 47%, said that they experienced discrimination as customers. So when they were shopping in businesses or grocery stores. 41% said that they experienced discrimination in the workplace, either as an employee or a job applicant. About a third, so 32%, said that they experienced discrimination as students in schools. 26% said they experienced the discrimination when they were riding public transit in California. A little over 1/5, so 22%, said that they experienced discrimination as related to housing, so either as renters or buyers of housing. and 18% said that they experienced discrimination when they were seeking services from the government. We also asked folks about the impact that the discrimination had on their lives, and we found that it does have devastating impacts. So about half of the folks who experienced discrimination said that they experienced negative effects on their mental health, so feeling sad, stressed, anxious, or depressed. A similar but slightly lower percentage, 45%, said that it changed their sense of belonging to their school, workplace, or community. I think that stat is likely related to then the 31% of folks who said that they had to change their behavior. So they actually changed their school or their job or where they shopped. Even though they did nothing wrong, they did feel like they had to make adjustments in their own life to respond to the unfair treatment or discrimination that they were experiencing. 33% said that they took steps to feel safe or safer, for instance, taking self-defense courses. Slightly over a quarter, 26%, said that their personal relationships were strained because of the discrimination, which highlights that the impact of discrimination isn't just on the individual who has experienced it, but that person's larger network, family, colleagues, friends. And then about 15% of folks said that they became more civically or politically active as a result of having faced discrimination. So despite 4 in 10 Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders having experienced illegal discrimination, only 15% of those actually reported it. This is so important, especially because there are remedies for civil rights violations, for discrimination. But as we see from our survey, only 15% of those who are experiencing discrimination report it. We asked some follow-up questions there. And 52% of those who did not report the discrimination they experienced, they did not report it. They said that they didn't report it because they thought reporting would not make a difference. About 4 in 10 also had other reasons for not reporting. So 38% said that they did not know where to go or what to do after they experienced discrimination. 37% said that they feared unwanted attention for themselves or their families. 37% also thought that reporting would take too much effort and time. Our communities also expressed fears of retaliation. So 26% feared that the offender would take negative action against them or their family if they reported or spoke out about the experience they experienced, the discrimination they experienced. And then about a fifth of folks said that they didn't report because they don't trust the government to do anything or did not know what they experienced was a civil rights violation. We also asked folks about their civil rights and whether they want to know more. And the good thing is they do. 6 in 10 Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders living in California want to know more about their civil rights. And they said that learning more about their rights would make them feel more comfortable reporting the discrimination they experienced. We also wanted to figure out how they want to learn and where they want to learn, because it's so important to meet people where they are. And most said that they want to learn about their civil rights via YouTube. That was actually the #1 answer at 46%, followed by social media at 42% and other websites at 38%. These 3 options were more popular than TV, in-person events, learning through the newspaper, a live hotline, podcast, or radio. A fifth of the survey respondents also prefer to learn more via ethnic media, which is critically important. As Candace noted, our survey was conducted in multiple languages, and our communities speak a wide array of languages, and many trust ethnic media as a source of their news and where they learn information from. About 55% said that they would feel more comfortable reporting if they knew nothing bad would happen to them or their families. So again, related to that fear of retaliation, being assured that retaliation is not permitted would actually help folks report the the discrimination they experience. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in California also trust community groups. So community advocacy or civil rights organizations serving Asians, Asian Americans, or Pacific Islanders were often cited as the entity that our communities feel most comfortable reporting a civil rights violation to, and most trust to learn about their civil rights from. Other choices included government agencies that enforce civil rights laws, one's HR departments, police or prosecutor, private lawyer, school staff, or religious leader. And we think it's really important to highlight that there is a entity in the community that folks trust already, and that's community groups. Our communities also trust civil rights agencies. So after the community groups, the top trusted group, both to learn about their civil rights from and to report civil rights to, are government civil rights agencies. We specifically asked folks in California if they've ever heard of the Department of Fair Employment and Housing and the California Civil Rights Department. And people have heard of DFEH, now CRD. And so 59% of folks had heard of DFEH and knew what they did. A slightly lower percentage have heard about the California Civil Rights Department. This should not be that surprising, as the name change is very, very recent. Although I will say 61% said that they know what the California Civil Rights Department does, which to me indicates that the name change helps to let folks know what the department does. I also want to emphasize that 2/3 of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in California say that they want new civil rights laws because they feel like new civil rights laws are needed to reduce the discrimination and unfair treatment against our communities. I'll pass it back to Candace now, who will talk about our path forward.
Thanks, Annie. So where do we go from here? I think that we saw a hint on the last slide in which Annie showed that over 2/3 of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are calling for new civil rights laws. Similarly, we at Stop AAPI Hate, we focus on solutions outside of the criminal legal system. And we do that for lots of reasons, because acts of discrimination, verbal harassment, and other hate incidents are not crimes. Because relying on the police as the solution to all of our problems, including hate, comes at the cost of Black, Pacific Islander, and other communities being disproportionately and unjustly targeted by law enforcement. And because Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders want comprehensive solutions. In addition to that finding from the survey with NORC, a couple years ago, we asked 1,000 Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders what they see as the most effective solutions to address hate. And more of us chose educational equity, community-based solutions, and civil rights legislation and enforcement over more law enforcement. So we want to share with you 2 recommendations for states and local governments, including ours. The first is that we need investments in our community-based infrastructure, such as the API equity budget. And the second is that we need our state public agencies and local public agencies to address hate incidents, race-based harm that isn't a hate crime. So I want to share with you a little bit about the API equity budget. It's a $165 million investment in addressing hate in California that was passed by our state legislature and signed into law by Governor Newsom. A majority of this pot, $110 million, goes directly to community-based organizations at the front lines of preventing and responding to hate when it happens and where it happens. We need more public investments like this into innovative, tailored, on-the-ground solutions like these from groups that are trusted by vulnerable communities already reeling from hate. These are the groups that AAPIs trust, as Annie mentioned. The second recommendation we're making is that we need public agencies to address hate incidents. In other words, race-based harm that isn't a hate crime. And that's why we at Stop AAPI Hate launched the No Place for Hate California campaign to address the racialized harassment, often verbal, that happens in places open to the public, like streets and sidewalks, public transportation, and businesses. And we're so heartened by the fact that last year, the legislature passed and the governor signed into law 2 of our bills. This year, we're back with another bill. And collectively, these bills shift the burden of being safe away from us as individuals who are unfairly targeted for hate and onto public agencies like the California Civil Rights Department, which, as we learned from the survey and as Annie mentioned, our communities know and trust, or like public transit. And speaking of the Civil Rights Department, that's why we're so excited about the launch of California versus Hate. This is a place where anyone who experiences hate can report what happened to them, regardless of whether that hate was a crime or an incident that's not a crime. It's also a place where people can get connected to services. So thank you so much for listening, and we're happy to take your questions and the opportunity to engage with you after the next presentation.
Thank you, Annie and Candace, for that presentation. And again, as a reminder, we will be taking comments or questions after the next presentation. Thank you. With that, we'll go ahead and go into the next presentation. That will be Hate Crime Trends, a Changing Threat and Invisible Records. And that will be presented by Commissioner Brian Levin. Brian Levin, for over 3 decades, was a civil rights attorney and criminologist. Professor Brian Levin has been recognized for pioneering research and policy initiatives on hate and extremism with academia, the non-governmental organization community, courts, and government. Mr. Levin is founding director of California State University, San Bernardino's award-winning Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism. Professor Levin is a 2020 recipient of the annual Wang Family Excellence Award for Outstanding Scholarship for the CSU system, the largest in the nation. He has authored or co-authored influential studies on hate crime, trends, as well as related Supreme Court briefs, and widely cited articles in journals like Stanford Law and Policy Review, Northwestern Law School of Crime and Criminology, and America Behavioral Scientist. Professor Levin has testified and presented analysis before Congress and the California legislature across 4 decades. In addition, he has assisted the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Anti-Semitism, numerous universities, state and federal agencies, the Organizations for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and innumerable non-governmental organizations. He has served on various boards, including the California Association of Official Human Relations Organizations, the National Coalition for the Homeless. We are Many United Against Hate, Wisconsin, and was an organizational representative to the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights Task Force. Levin received his bachelor's degree with multiple honors in history from the University of Pennsylvania and his Juris Doctorate with multiple honors in history from the University of Pennsylvania and his Juris Doctorate from Stanford Law School, where he was awarded the Block Civil Liberties Award. He is a member of the State Bar of California and Supreme Court of the United States. And welcome, Dr. Levin.
I think I should just leave now. And most importantly, my mom wanted me to be a doctor. Anyway, let's go straight to this very interesting presentation today. I hope you find it such. I am Professor Brian Levin, he, him, 24 years over at Cal State, but doing this stuff for 37 years, including working the promulgation of the Hate Crime Statistics Act and the first US Supreme Court case which affirmed hate crime laws. Hey, you know what I'm going to do real quick? I'm going to start with the most frequently asked yes or no questions and then get into the presentation. And the answers to these questions are generally found in our prior report to the nation pieces that are at the Cal State site. So I'm just going to rattle them off quick, and then I'm going to go into the presentation. Hoaxes. Are there a lot of hoaxes? No. We found basically 11 to 30 in 3 separate years when we had thousands. It's a fraction of 1%. What about the Wall Street Journal editorial page in the book Hate Hoaxes? They're incorrect. We use a definition of hate crime, which is a criminal act motivated in whole or in part by bias against an actual or perceived group. There aren't that many. Okay, prosecutions and carceral models. We don't have a lot of prosecutions. Texas, I think we had less than 5 last year out of hundreds. If you look at the California Attorney General's report, California is a pretty decent state with regard to prosecutions, and we're low. New York City, similar. When the new DA, Gascon, came in and said he was going to pull the plug on hate crime prosecutions, there were only 3 felonies. One involving a fellow who did a neo-Nazi salute while shouting "White Lives Matter" at a black motorist. The other 2 were attempted murders of transgender. That's it out of the hundreds and hundreds of cases. So we're not seeing a lot of prosecutions under hate crime laws. Deterrence. People are right on both sides. We don't have any definitive studies. We're trying to get more. As more and more jurisdictions are actually paying attention, we bet you there's some instances where we have to, look behind the furniture to see these new, hopefully instructive things. However, the only thing we have that comes close cuts both ways. When Boston enacted a civil rights law and put together a hate crime unit, after a terrible Pulitzer Prize winning photo showed a Boston city official in a suit having an American flag rammed into him in a racial attack, they cut their numbers from just under 700 to under 200. That's in Wexler and Marks if you're interested. What about web portals like our friends at Stop AAPI8? Do they work? Are they good? Yes, they do, and yes, they are. We looked at Southern Poverty Law Center's web portal after the 2016 election, and we tried to see whether it correlated with day-by-day ticks in hate crimes, and it was very, very close. So these are complementary types of data that include unreported crimes, but also non-crimes. Very helpful stuff. And when we back tested at least SPLCs, it worked, and it's very consistent with what we find. Extremist homicides. Oh my gosh, I get these questions all the time. Real quick, was every extremist homicide last year a white supremacist far right? Well, that's what our colleagues and friends at the ADL, who've been doing great stuff since '79, found, but we found different. We found that homicide of that Asian physician, that Chinese physician who was killed by another Chinese person over ideology. That counted. We also saw 3 Muslim on Muslim hate crimes in addition in New Mexico, and we saw another religious crime in California. But here's the thing. The overwhelming majority, particularly since 2018, have been white supremacist, far right. It's part of this transnational trend where they glorify mass killings and this horrible replacement stuff. Is there massive underreporting in our data? Yes. What else? How many hate crimes are there? Real quick, really important. We're getting different numbers from all over the place. Even the FBI is using 2 different data sets of theirs. Let me simplify it. In 2020, 8263, a big increase over the previous year and the highest since 2001. They revised and supplemented. That's why you'll see certain instances where folks are saying 7,700. They left out most of Ohio, which had a record. 8263 for 2020. Then again in December of 2021, they came out with an incomplete report where they only had about 63% of agencies participating, and usually they have well over 90%. They supplemented. So what's the latest data from the FBI? This is it, and this is correct. 8263 in 2020 after the supplement. Similarly, after they supplemented their lack of participation, they came up with about 80%, and that's still below what we saw the previous 5 years. But we had a record. 11,840 hate crimes. FBI said, hey, that's about an 11.6% increase. No, they're using different ways of counting different agencies' by same period last year. I'm not going to go into detail. Bottom line is it's more about a 31% increase, which was similar to what California found. Wow, we got that out of the way. Let's go to the videotape, as they used to say on the sports shows. Let's go to the first slide if we can. And thank you for allowing me the opportunity to correct some of these things. Look at this horrible incline. Short story. For 2022, we're releasing data next week. Not California, but the rest of the country, we're seeing increases, and it varies by city size. The very largest cities in the United States, including Los Angeles, are hitting multi-year highs. Religion hit a multi-year high. Anti-Semitic in the major cities, at least a dozen years. Our friends at ADL showed even higher increases, but they count more non-criminal incidents as well. Let's go to the next one. They're getting more violent. That's aggravated assaults. So that's the latest that we have from FBI data, but we're seeing this translate into many cities. So you can see over time, we're hitting this crescendo where we're having not only records, but we're also hitting more violent types of hate crimes. Let's go to another slide real quick. Thank you, by the way. Here, this is the from FBI. What we have on top of that are 2022 increases in major American cities. Again, varies by size. We'll be releasing those full numbers next week. But look what we have here. We had an increase of about 14% in anti-Black in 2021. We showed 16% anti-white increase, anti-gay male, anti-Jewish was up about 20%. In the major cities where Jewish folks are more clustered demographically, 59% increase in 2021. So what we're seeing is the increases in 2022, sometimes we're having a cresting off of big increases the 2 or 3 years before, and then other groups being carouseled into the hate spotlight. Let's look at the next slide. One of the things that we found is these correlate to seasons. Notice it goes down a lot. Yeah, that's why the data we have for 2023, I'm not putting a lot of stock in. It's down a little bit in some places, varies by city size again. But bottom line is most of the hate crimes that occur in any given year and against certain particular groups tend to occur in the second half. But what we're seeing, if you look to the right, see that increase around George Floyd, the social justice protests, it's showing a more resilient type of hate. So what we're finding is even when stuff goes down, it takes longer to go down, and it correlates to what we're seeing with regard to online manifestations, and also the kinds of social science data that we're getting from our friends at Stop AAPI Hate, which show a lot of non-criminal harassments. Let's move on. I'm trying to squeeze in as fast as I can. All right, if you look at the bottom here, this is all hate crimes. Look at that. That's what I'm talking about. That pink at the bottom line, that's 2020. Why don't we have 2021? FBI hasn't given us actionable data. We can break it down like that. But bottom line is, look at that. Second worst month ever for hate crime was in June 2020, when we saw the social justice protests also go up. So it correlates to catalytic events that occur, but also invected in conspiracism online. Let's go to the next slide. What do I mean? Look at that. What we did, and my friends, Messrs. Thompson and Nolan, who helped me put this gibberish together into something meaningful. Do politics play a role? Do social media play a role? Answer, yes, yes. Look at that. When we looked at epithets on 4chan, which was at that time the real kind of Walmart or super center. I shouldn't say Walmart. No, I take it back. The super center of hate. Look at that. Went up just around the same time that hate crimes went up. And we also saw foreign interference coming from Russia, racially divisive stuff against Barack Obama and against immigrants that were coming from Russia. So in other words, this is transnational now, folks. And it's not just these ne'er-do-wells. It's also organized governments trying to cause disruption. Let's go to another quick slide. Here's California. California is interesting. Short story. Yeah, we went up about, look at that, about a third, 2021. The data that we have so far for the major cities, we'll see a slide later, too close to call. We're up about 5 when we look at 10 major cities. We don't know whether 2022 overall is going to go up because we had a cresting against those anchor traditional groups, anti-Black, for instance, anti-Jewish, still going up, but was going up less quickly, unfortunately. What do we see on top of that? Let's go forward another slide. Here's what we're seeing in California cities. Look at that, only a 4 difference, but it's geographically really stratified. LA hit what looks like a multi-decade high. I'm not going to say a record because this is going to be different. What the California DOJ comes out with in a little more than a month, they're going to cut about 25% of that out because LA in their preliminary data counts it by victims, not event. So for instance, a massacre can include many victims, but it's one event, for instance. But Sacramento hitting multi-decade highs might be a record. Other places trending off of recent highs. So it's very important to recognize this is trending off a record year nationally, not a record year in California, but a multi-year high for California. Let's go to the next slide real quick. Here's our California demographics compared to the United States as a whole. We have a greater proportion of Latino residents. We have a greater proportion of Asian residents, but a smaller proportion of Anglo-white. Let's go forward. This is how it compares nationally. For instance, white non-Hispanic, about just under 60%. So we have about double the proportion of Latino residents than the nation does as a whole. And I kind of love this place. Anyway, let's move forward with another slide. This is really interesting. 2022, you got to look at local demographics. So in New York City, 2022, we hit a record and anti-Jewish was #1. But in Los Angeles, anti-Black was #1. In San Jose, anti-Black #1. San Francisco, anti-Asian #1. So it varies by the local demographics and densities of the places we're at. Let's go to another slide. Do I have like 3 more minutes? How are we doing, Alec?
We actually have you at 6 minutes, Commissioner Levin.
Great. Alec, I'm going to take one of those 6 minutes right now. Alec, I'm not allowed to speak on behalf of the commission for anything, but I'm going to exercise some leisure domain. We are so thankful you are with us, and every single subcommittee is working you so hard. We got to be a little nicer to you, but thank you so much for the Herculean effort. Yes, I'm using some of my time for that. Let's look at what we're seeing in 2022 in the major cities. Similar, but a little different than what we're seeing nationally. Nationally, really interesting with regard to race. 96, anti-Black, 42% of all hate crimes. Going down each year as a proportion of all hate crimes, whether it goes up or down. Anti-Black was going down. Hit about 26% in 2019. Then with those protests I showed you and the social justice, boom, rocketed back up in 2020. So we're now about 28 to 30% nationally, but look what we see in California cities. Well, African Americans are less represented in California, so we're seeing that affect victimization. But still, look at that, about 6% statewide population. Look at that, just under 24%. Then anti-Jewish in the California cities, 17.2%. That's like anti-gay male, you get the rest in there. Anti-Asian, if you're sitting there going, wait a minute, it doesn't feel exactly right. Certain groups have massive underreporting. Don't have time to go into it. So yes, we're sorting what we have, but we recognize that there are a lot of limitations. These are reported in the major cities in California. Let's go to the next slide real quick. This shows again nationally over the previous 10 years, as I said, African American were about 30%, Jewish 12%, compared, that's over a 10-year, compared to 17%, which we saw in 2022. So the things that Jewish people are feeling are certainly correlated with the data. Let's move on. And this is just, we took some major cities in California that we actually could break down the data. Again, now we're seeing the African-American proportion go up higher, right? So as we get into those more densely populated cities where these clusters are more common. Let's go to the next slide. And just real briefly, we're going to come out with the exact numbers next week. But here's what we saw for 2022. After big increases before, anti-Black up 45% in 2020, then another double-digit increase the next year. Anti-Jewish went down 2020 because a lot of the cities that are densely populated where they live, the public transit and the schools were closed and schools were closed. But what did the ADL show? It went online and it Zoom bombings, things like that. So the hate in the pipe, unfortunately, vents somewhere. But the top 5 groups that we saw: anti-other race, anti-LGBTQ mixed, anti-gender nonconform, that's drag, anti-Jewish, anti-transgender. Let's move. Let's just move to the next slide. This is not a one-time thing, folks. I went back and looked at multi-year analysis. Yes, there's something called reporting effect as we recognize that in official data. But look at those increases, folks. We are at an inflection point. I really want folks that are listening in their communities, particularly for Pride Month. We're trying to toy with how we're going to do an advisory that it actually means something. This is a good time to coordinate with your local advocacy groups, human relations commissions, LGBTQ groups, as well as victim services and police. Let them know where these places are that can be targets, and are there events? We are seeing armed thugs and quasi-militias. There's a militia law in this state, and I'd like to see it enforced when people who are exercising their First Amendment rights to association and expression get protected. We saw it when the Patriot Front, these Nazis that were this de-evolution from these Charlottesville Nazis, showed up in Idaho, and 31 of them were arrested. This stuff can be done. Let's show the next slide real quick. Look at this. We're seeing this increase at the same time that we're seeing, this is our friends at ACLEAD over in New Jersey. Sam, I think you're the best researcher. Look at this. We counted years ago these conflictual types of protests and rallies, and we saw it correlate to things. One of the social science data points that we look at, besides online and criminal reports, we look at this kind of things. Look at this. This correlates with the invective, and when and I think we should call out some folks. It is perfectly fine to debate medical issues and health issues and how people who are transitioning will be recognized in certain fora. That's not where we are. We're at a demonization and a genocidal type of language against our fellow residents. And I am very happy and honored that I am able to participate with this kind of data to show the residents of this state that we take your expressive rights, your identity rights, and your civil liberties seriously. And I urge all Californians to look at what this commission is doing, what the Civil Rights Department is doing, and the leadership that is taking place in governance here, because we got your back. This isn't about whether or not I'm a transgender person or whether or not I'm gay. It's something more substantial. And that is something that my mentor, Judge Higginbotham, a Black judge, there were no Black judges appointed last federal administration, appellate-wise. And what he told me is, he said, Brian, use this data to inform public policy. And when we see residents of our state being maligned and being the target of eliminationist and genocidal language, I don't care what their faith, their identity is, the laws of the state of California mandate that we protect your civil rights, and they'll have to carry me out in a box before I stop doing it. And this is a warning sign. The data is showing that groups like our Jewish brothers and sisters, who it's their Heritage Month, and our Asian American brothers and sisters, who, by the way, had a decline in hate that was substantial in double digits. Yet, if we adjusted it to FBI figures, it would be the second worst. It would be almost a record than what we've had over 31 years. So I am so glad that we have the wonderful commissioners on this, the Civil Rights Department, and all the wonderful folks who I won't go in individually, except for Alex, who deserves it from every subcommittee, because it's important to have data and empathy and some core principles of civil rights and civil liberties, and the way that we should be able to identify ourselves, care for our children and family members, and make sure that they can do that in a state that protects their freedom of expression, their freedom of association, and their right to identify as who they see fit as individuals in a pluralistic democracy. And again, I want to thank this commission and this department for giving us this opportunity, which we did not have with the legislature before because of a very dense docket. Thank you, and I'll take questions later. But we have to stand up for these communities that are under attack, whether it's the AAPI-NH, the Jewish community, or the LGBTQI community, and elderly and disabled community as well, among others.
Thank you so much, Dr. Levin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And what a great presentation, and all those words. I mean, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. So thank you so much for your presentation. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Commissioner Filer, because we will be going to public comment. Commissioner Filer.
Sorry. I wanted to thank all of our presenters. We're going to move into the public comment process. Just as a reminder, our public comments and questions should be related to the presentations that we just had, and please limit it to 3 minutes. And I will ask if we have any public comments or questions at this time.
Yeah, first public comment, Charles Chung.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Charles Jung. I wanted to really appreciate the speakers, Annie, Candace, and Brian, all excellent community partners, and so definitely appreciate their work. I wanted to, my name is Charles Jung. I'm a community organizer, also the executive director of the California Asian Pacific American Bar Association, which represents the interests of California's API attorneys and also our 23 sister bar affiliate organizations around the state. Wanted to make two points. One is, one is that in organizing the community over the organizing community events over the past 2 years, one thing that I've seen pretty loud and clear is that the Asian American community's view is a yes and approach. It's not a one or the other. So what I mean by that specifically is that definitely the focus on civil remedies and strengthening our civil rights department and civil rights laws, that is quite important and broadly supported. I agree with that, but I don't think it's accurate to say that a decarceral approach is one that is widely embraced by the community. In fact, I don't think it is, and I think the statistics show that that's the case. There was a 2022 Pew survey that showed that nearly half of Asian Americans say strengthening laws against hate crimes would be the most effective at preventing violence against Asian Americans, with an additional 14% saying the next, that increasing local police presence is also an effective measure. So that's nearly 2/3 who believe that a criminal law approach is the most effective means. And here I'm not advocating for one or the other. All I'm saying is that the non-carceral approach is, I would not say, quite representative of the community's view. It's both. It's both. Let's focus on civil rights enforcement, but also there is a place for criminal law. And I mentioned that in the context of hate crimes law reforms, where there's been a pretty broad-based call to update our hate crimes law and our policies and enforcements such that it reflects the 2017 or 2018 state auditors report that is trying to tackle this question as to why so few hate crimes are ever prosecuted. They almost are never prosecuted, as Brian Levin made that point. So that's my first point. Second point, which is quick, but to me, no less important, which is that, one thing that I've observed in the community is, sometimes there's unhelpful language and some strong feelings, particularly as it relates to intergroup violence. And that's something that I think we cannot ignore. And so I think, people, talk, I grew up in Black communities, but I also represent the API community.
Charles, I'm going to interrupt just for 1 second, just if you could summarize your comments, because we want to make sure to get to everyone. So I'll let you just one more sentence to summarize everything.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. One thing I'll say is that we have to, social change and unity comes from addressing real conflicts and differences, not by avoiding the tough questions. And I urge you as commissioners to please not shy away from the difficult conversations and facts. That's how we're going to achieve intergroup unity.
Thank you so much. And we really appreciate your comments. And I'm going to move on. Are there any other public comments or questions?
Yeah, moving on to Dana.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. I am a PhD student at UCLA. I'm a grantee in a very exciting and important initiative, the Initiative to Study Hate at UCLA. And I am here today as an advocate, but also researcher on behalf of disabled people and people with chronic illness, including long COVID. I am the graduate head of the Disability Students Union at UCLA. I'm also a co-founder of a peer advisory board where we aim to mentor students with disabilities and chronic illness. And I'm part of the UC Berkeley Disability Lab research unit, where we've been doing 2 years of research on discrimination against students with disabilities. And we found that many of the things that have been spoken about today, so for example, educational equity, feeling like you have to hide who you are, not being able to express yourself, afraid of retaliation, it would take too much time to report, not reporting out of fear of what that would do, are particularly relevant to students, especially in higher education where the retention rate is less than 50%. And what I've found in my research this year has been there is a need to work with all of these groups to find information about where the disability-related discrimination is also applying. And I saw, Professor Levin, I read your comments at the SPL Center, you call it invisible hate crime, disability-related hate. I believe that was you that was quoted. And it was an excellent piece where you basically explained that for some reason people aren't taking disability-related hate as seriously. There's explanation after explanation saying, oh, but that's just because they wanted what's best for the person, or there's other ways to sort of explain it out of relevance. And so what I saw in some of your slides, I saw a little bit of a category that said mental, I think it was on the basis of, there was one category called anti-mental disability. And I want to ask you about that. And I want to ask you how people with disabilities who are a protected group, who are part of every single ethnicity, religion, race, age group, how can we incorporate their protection and their, they're being victimized and being harmed, and their communities are being harmed. And I would love to know what we can do to incorporate this into everyone's incredible work. Thank you so much in advance. It's an honor to meet you all virtually. and I appreciate it.
Dana, thank you so much. And we really value the work that's being done at UCLA. Several of us commissioners have been attending all the presentations. I don't know, Commissioner Levin, do you want to make a few comments related to what Dana said, or should we move on to the next public comment?
Well, just real briefly, let's stop here for a second, because the disability community does not get to have its voice heard, and I am so thankful. Greg DeGier has done some excellent work indeed. Mr. Young was critical to getting this commission established. No matter whether or not you agree directly on every issue, and that's what's so beautiful about what we see here. Bottom line, for the numbers that we're getting in, we have so few that we are able to bring in from across the country that we can't even process it. But what there appears to be is an increase. And as someone who has had people victimized because of this in his own family, you have an ally here. One of the difficulties, though, is of all the kind of hate crimes that are out there, those that are homeless, often misogynistic ones, and ones against undocumented people, as well as Native Americans and the disabled community, tend to be the most shrouded and difficult for researchers to get information. So please know that when I write these things, and when I go to these fora and hear about the terrible types of intersectional victimization, in other words, someone who's elderly and disabled, someone who's homeless and disabled, someone who's young and disabled, or someone who's a person of color and disabled, it's an extra added dose of aggression that comes here. And one of the things that we hope to do in the years to follow is to get more information. But right now, it is incredibly difficult because oftentimes so many of the malefactors have some institutional and informational ability to shroud this reporting. But thank you for bringing it up, and we stand with your community.
Oh, Commissioner Fryler, you're on mute.
All right, thank you. Are there any other public comments or questions at this time, Monica?
Yeah, there are about 3 more. Next is ING staff.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Zachary Markwith, and I'm the Deputy Director at Islamic Networks Group, or ING. I would like to respond to Commissioner Brian Levin's excellent presentation on hate crimes trends, especially as it relates to Muslim Americans and Islamophobia or anti-Muslim racism. Muslims don't often report hate crimes and incidents to the police or FBI for a variety of reasons. Thus, the official numbers aren't accurate. In addition to hate crimes and incidents, including attacks on Muslim-owned businesses and mosques, such as 6 attacks at Minnesota mosques in recent weeks, as well as many here in California, Muslims face higher rates of interpersonal discrimination in public places and institutional discrimination. And a 2022 poll found that Muslim Americans were the most likely group to report religious discrimination at 62%, compared to 26% of the general public. 43% of Muslims reported facing religious discrimination from coworkers. We also have higher levels in institutional settings, 44% at the airport versus 3% of the general public, when interacting with law enforcement, when applying for a job, when seeking healthcare. And as I mentioned in the previous meeting, nearly 50% of Muslim students are bullied by both students and teachers. And we know from research that hate crimes and incidences don't happen in a vacuum, but are connected to hate speech and interpersonal and institutional forms of bigotry and discrimination. And we can counter Islamophobia and other forms of bigotry through education and engagement with Muslims and other groups who are impacted. I'll reserve my recommendation for how we can address these challenges in the public comment on items not on the agenda portion of this forum. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any more public comments or questions?
Yeah, it looks like we have about 2 more.
Okay, great.
Next, we have Greg DeGier.
Greg, you may be on mute. We're not hearing you.
Okay, I'll start again. Thank you. I'm Greg DeGier. I'm the civil rights advocate of the ARC and United Cerebral Palsy California Collaboration, large intellectual development disability organization. I want to thank Dana and Professor Levin for their comments about anti-disability hate crimes. We've known in California since 2001 that anti-disability hate crimes are the largest single unreported hate crime in the state, with anti-female very close second for being unreported. Yet here we are 22 years later, still the same fact as shown by the statistics that Professor Levin put up. I'll go through some of that in a minute, but first I want to stress, because since I've only got 3 minutes, what we need to do about it. One of the things we need to do about it is much better policing. It's true that most of the crimes against people with disabilities, like other communities, are not hate crimes. They're crimes, and there's need to pay attention to those. And most of the discrimination and bias against people with disabilities are not crimes at all, hate crimes or other kinds of crimes. They're either civil violations, or they're simply expressions of hate that are protected by the First Amendment, but are very serious and very, very harmful. We need to address all of those. But number one on the list, from our point of view, is hate crimes. Now, the law enforcement has been basically terrible. They finally, in 2021 in California, reported 12 anti-disability hate crimes. That may not sound like much, and it isn't, but it's 3 or 4 times what they usually report. Nationally, the Department of Justice reported, based on a survey of victims, 40,000 anti-disability hate crimes per year. That is a huge underreport. It doesn't count any hate crimes committed in institutions, nursing homes, prisons, any other institution, hospitals, and it doesn't count any hate crimes that the victim did not recognize as a hate crime, which they often do not. Does not count any anti-disability hate crimes that the police did not take seriously, which happens all the time. But let's take that 40,000. Compare that to the as underreported as that is, to the number that law enforcement agencies reported just the year before last. Using that 40,000 figure and the number that was reported by police, the police reported less than 0.5% of the anti-disability hate crimes. Not much better for anti-gender hate crimes. Those two areas, and those two, by the way, disability and gender overlap, intersect with every other community. Every community has its share of women and transgender and people with disabilities, and so this is not a tiny or a isolated thing that affects only people with disabilities and women and girls. It affects all of us.
Greg, thank you so much for your comments. We're going to need to move on. I believe we have one more public comment or question. Monica, is that correct?
We have 2 more.
2 more, okay. And we'll need to kind of cut it off at that then, because we need to move on to our next presentations. Okay.
Next person is Mark Solomon.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. I'm sitting here with a little bit of, I'd like to put my video on. I don't know how to do that here. Can I put my video on? There you go. Yes, no?
Yes, you can.
Where is it? I don't see where to put it on.
It might be at the bottom of your screen.
Or it should say like stop video or by your mute button.
Okay, I'm taking more time here. I don't know why it's not here. That's
It
so
might be
strange.
disabled, it might be disabled, Mark, so feel free to.
Okay, good
public
enough.
comment.
My stomach is in knots. I really feel terrible. My name's Mark Solomons, and I'm speaking for myself, but I've been part of an organization in Northern California, NOLA Marin, that successfully passed AB 2282 and consulted with Brian during that process. I'm in knots because I feel like our education system has failed somehow, that we're in this place of trying to stop people. Specific comments are, Brian mentioned the transnational organized government online threat, and I think I would like to see more focus on our online moderation that is just failing. And secondly, the comments from the Asian presentation, I'm familiar with the right to know bystander training for harassment. That could be a possible source for resources. And thirdly, my strongest feeling to get rid of this pit in my stomach is offline dialogue, where people are invited to engage. I really appreciated the Islamic speaker's comment about education and engagement. Engagement means people meeting each other in the flesh and feeling each other's pain and trying to come to some common understanding. Thirdly, or at the very end here, did I miss the resource presentation with Becky Monroe? Or was that not included?
No, we'll
We'll
be
be up
getting to that
next.
next, Mark. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yes.
That's all I'd like to say. I
Okay,
appreciate it.
thank you so much. And I believe we have one more comment or question.
Yes, we have Vincent next.
Okay. All right, Vincent, go ahead. Vincent, I don't know if you're talking, but you're on mute. I think we can hear you now, Vincent, if you want to go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can now.
Oh my gosh, I did not know I was on. Can you continue proceeding a little bit further, and so I can kind of gather my my recollection and thoughts here?
Yeah, there will be an open public discussion opportunity at the end again. So why don't we move forward with our next presentation? Commissioner Cuellar, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you so very much to all the comments that were given. And no, I really want the community to know that we are listening and we are taking back everything that you're saying, and we will have discussions about it. And I just really want you to know that. I know that you know, we're pressed for time with only the 3 minutes, but I do want you to know that we are listening and writing down everything that you guys are saying.
Yes.
So with that, I'd like to go into I'm sorry, what was that?
Yeah, Commissioner Cuellar, I think I forgot if there were any written public comments, if we had any of those that we needed to have presented at this moment before we move into the next section. Are there any written comments?
We have no written comments. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. Sorry, Commissioner Cuellar.
No, that's
we'll turn
perfectly
it over.
fine.
Yeah.
No worries. We want to make sure that we give everybody an opportunity to
Absolutely.
voice their concerns, and there will be an email put on if anybody, if they're not comfortable speaking, they can definitely email their concerns there. So thank you so much. With that though, let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break if everybody's okay with that before we start with the next presentation. So 5 minutes, it is 12:53, so 12:57 we'll be back.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Okay. We got everybody back yet?
Okay.
Okay, there we go. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and start back if everybody's finished with their break. So the next thing that we have coming up is our next presentation. We're gonna go ahead and move into agenda item number 3, which is informational presentations on options and resources for people targeted for hate. And that will be presented by Christina Texera and Gregory Mann. Christina Texera, pronouns she and her. Christina grew up in California as a daughter and granddaughter of Azorean Portuguese immigrants. Christina studied political science and women's studies at San Francisco State University and received her law degree from the Dale E. Fowler School of Law in Orange, California. Thereafter, Christina practiced as a legal services attorney in the areas of eviction defense, fair housing, public benefits, and gender-affirming services before transitioning to state service as a California Department of Social Services Civil Rights Unit Manager. Christina joined the Civil Rights Department Community Conflict Resolution Team, otherwise known as CREW, in October 2022. Gregory Mann, pronouns he, him. After nearly 13 years as an attorney and associate chief counsel in the California Civil Rights Department's Legal Division, Gregory joined the Community Conflict Resolution Unit, also known as CREW, as senior attorney mediator. Gregory investigated, litigated, and mediated civil rights cases involving hate incidents and discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodations. He brings 20+ years of civil rights experience and training as a mediator to CREW to assist communities experiencing fear, conflict, and/or tension because of discriminatory practices. Welcome, Greg and Christina.
Thank you, Commissioner Cuellar and Commissioner Filer. We're very happy to be here today. And we're going to be talking about knowing, so folks understand their rights when they're confronted by hate. We go to the next slide, please, Alec. We only have 20 minutes for this, so just want to let you know we're going to do the best we can, but if you do suffer from hate, that you should call the Civil Rights Department or somebody else to figure out more resources than we can provide here in this 20 minutes. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what are your options and rights when you're the victim or witness of a hate crime or hate incident? We're going to talk about these 4 topics, the definitions of hate crime and hate incident, including the difference between criminal law and civil law. Christina is going to talk about options for victims and witnesses of a hate crime and how to report a hate crime. And then I'll return to discuss pursuing your rights if you are the victim of a hate crime. Next slide, please. So let's start with the definition of a hate crime and hate incident. First, we'll be talking about hate crime. A hate crime is a criminal act committed because of the following actual or perceived characteristics of the victim. We call these protected characteristics, and they're disability, gender, including gender identity, nationality, race or ethnicity, religion, and sexual orientation. Perceived is included in the definition because if somebody commits a hate crime because they think somebody's a part of one of these groups, even if the victim is not a part of the group, that still constitutes a hate crime. Now, it's important to know that not all expressions of hate are a criminal act. Hate crimes require the violation of California criminal law, the penal code. So in order for something to be a hate crime, there has to be an underlying criminal act committed. So somebody breaks the law, a criminal law, because they're targeting somebody for hate, then that becomes a hate crime. In criminal versus civil, criminal laws are those laws that could wind somebody up in prison or jail. Civil laws are the laws where a plaintiff sues a defendant and seeks some kind of compensation or other remedies. But in civil cases, you're not talking about jail or prison. It's important to know that hate crimes can target people or property. Now, the Commission is going to be releasing its annual report soon. And in doing that, it has adopted an expansive definition of hate that includes hate crimes and hate incidents. And here on the slide, you see the definition of a hate crime, which is part of the California Penal Code. So these are, again, criminal statutes that are committed as part of an act or expression of hate. And if a criminal act is part of it, then that is a hate crime. Next slide, please. We'll take a look at some examples of hate crimes. And you see here, as I said, that these all involve the violation of a criminal law. So if you attack or assault somebody, that could wind you up in prison. That's a violation of a criminal law. Vandalism of a mosque, synagogue, a church, gurdwara, a temple, LGBTQ plus community center. Again, vandalism is a criminal law. So if there's a criminal act committed and the person doing it is targeting the people, the victim, because of those protected characteristics, then that becomes a hate crime. Next slide, please. So we talked about hate crimes. Now we're going to talk about hate incidents. Now, we saw with hate crimes that it requires a violation of the California Penal Code, and there's a specific statutory definition for hate crime. For hate incident, we don't have a statutory definition. There's no California law that defines hate incident, but the Commission has adopted a broad definition of hate incident, and it's very similar to hate crime. The main difference is that there's no violation of a criminal law with the hate incident. So that's really the key here. And there's two kinds of hate incidents. Again, hate incidents have no violation of an underlying criminal law, but they can violate civil laws. And I'm going to talk more about that later. And then there are also hate incidents that do not violate criminal or civil law. And we'll take a look at some examples on the next slide. So again, these are examples of hate incidents. There's no violation of a criminal law. And with these examples, there's also no violation of a civil law. So if somebody leaves a racist or anti-Semitic note on somebody's car or posts it around town, that's not a violation of a criminal law, and it may not be the violation of a civil law, but it's still a hate incident. It's still harmful and causes pain to the community. We've seen in the news recently people holding up signs on freeway overpasses with racist and anti-Semitic signs, messages. Again, it's not a crime to hold a sign on the freeway overpass. And if there's no threat of violence, often there's no civil violation either. So these are hate incidents, but not hate crimes. Next, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Christina to talk about options when you're experiencing or witnessing hate crime or incident.
Thanks, Greg. So I want to provide a little context before we get into this section. These are helpful tips or actions to keep in mind if you are experiencing hate. And these are, it's definitely not exhaustive. And this mostly applies to situations where that are in public, right? We heard a little bit earlier during the Stop AAPI Hate presentation that many of these incidents do happen in public. So if you are experiencing hate, your safety is absolutely the most important thing. And so if you're being attacked or you feel threatened, certainly you can call 911. We definitely, though, also heard from Commissioner Levin and during the Stop AAPI Hate presentation, as well as during some of the public comments, there are real and valid and legitimate reasons that folks have to fear contacting 911. So I want to just acknowledge that is something that someone can do if they are feeling comfortable doing so, and certainly if there's some kind of emergency. Also, if it's safe to do so, try to leave the area or move to a location with people who might be able to support you. So if you're on transit, if you're in a public shopping mall, if you're on the street, See if there is an area that you can move to or folks that can support you. Also check in with yourself, right? Our brains and our bodies go through particular actions, right? When we are feeling defensive, when we are feeling scared, when we are feeling angry. And so check in with your body, right? Are you clenching your fists? Are you taking a posture that might actually make the situation worse, that might sort of inflame things, right? Because we definitely always want to de-escalate away from violence and from physical attacks. In many circumstances, also, it's best not to engage or speak with the perpetrator and sort of end up in a yelling match. If it is safe to do so, you can calmly and firmly, as much as you can, try to establish some kind of physical boundaries. Don't come closer to me. Condemn that speech or actions. That's not okay. That is not comfortable to me. That those are things that are not all right with me. We can go to the next slide, please. So a little bit more, if you are finding yourself on the receiving end of something like that, certainly if there are witnesses present, again, you can ask those folks for support. If medical attention is needed for either physical or injuries to mental health, definitely do and you can seek those. Certainly also a more emotional support is tremendously important. And we heard and saw some statistics during the Stop AAPI Hate presentation about that. And also consider reporting the incident to California versus Hate, law enforcement, or other community group. We can go to the next slide, please. Now, what to do if you're witnessing hate, if you're a bystander in these situations? So again, your safety and the safety of the person being targeted are the most important, or the most important things. So things that you can do as a bystander is to introduce yourself to the person being targeted. Ask how you can support them. Hey, I'm Christina. I see what's happening here. What's your name? Is this, this seems like it's making you uncomfortable. Can I walk with you somewhere? Can I get off with you on the next stop? Can I get in between, you and this person? You definitely want to be careful, right? To not sort of turn your back to those folks, be present, be aware of your surroundings, but focus your attention on that person who's being targeted rather than trying to focus it on the perpetrator. And definitely offer support to the victim, right? How are you doing? Is there someone I can call for you? Is there someone I can take you to? And certainly be an ally. If you are in a situation or in a place where you have privilege, be an ally and offer support if you can, and if it's safe to do so. If we could go to the next slide, please. So part of experiencing hate, part of witnessing hate, and maybe part of reporting that hate then down the road does have to do with documenting. Documenting the incident, trying to get information from witnesses to try to support if there is a report later on, right? So if you can do so safely, try to document, record, or collect other evidence about what's happening. But again, keep your safety in mind. So some things that you could do is to write down notes about what happened as they're fresh in your mind, right? Exact words that were used. If you have a description of the person who's perpetrating the act, right? Their vehicle, the license plate number, any kind of specific characteristics they have, right? Maybe you didn't get a good look, but maybe someone else did, right? And again, collecting information from folks that feel safe to do so, right? We've heard, again, there are a lot of very real reasons why folks might not feel safe doing that. Save the evidence that you do have, right? If you can, email it to yourself if you have an email address and use email. If you can text it or send it to somebody, if it's on your phone, who you trust, right? Because you want to be able to preserve that evidence. And again, if you feel safe doing so, you can contact law enforcement to share that information, or contact resource lines like California versus Hate, which you'll hear about in a little while, local hotlines that might be regional in your area, or community organizations who can help. Next slide, please. So if you do decide to report, if you are comfortable doing so, you can certainly file a police report in person or by phone with the agency where the incident happened. So some things to keep in mind, some things that could be helpful. Again, thinking about collecting that evidence, documenting that, providing all of the details about the perpetrator, right? Any particular characteristics, stuff that might distinguish them, any of the threats or comments made, certainly any kind of physical evidence that you have, photos or video. Also be thoughtful about taking photos or video before something is washed away, right? Maybe it's spray painted graffiti, maybe it's something in chalk on a sidewalk. Also try to confirm with the officer, if possible, that you're giving the report to, that it's being documented as a hate crime or a hate incident. If that's what you believe happened, it's important to make sure that that's in that report. Then certainly you can also follow up with the agency or with the officer to request a copy of the report and to make sure that it was filed. We could go to the next slide, please. So in addition to, right, or instead of contacting local law enforcement, your local FBI field office presents another opportunity. Although, again, we also heard during public comment that there are particular groups that have been targeted, and so don't feel comfortable. But this presents itself as an alternative for folks who feel comfortable doing so. And if you're not comfortable pursuing the above, certainly you can try to find a trusted person or community group to support you through those other options, which could include civil complaints or using a resource line. Again, California versus Hate would be one such resource, and we'll hear about them later. I also want to add, related to one of the public comments made earlier, that state agencies or community groups that get money in any way, shape, or form from the state have an affirmative legal obligation to provide reasonable accommodations to persons with disabilities. So there shouldn't be any barrier to reporting or to getting help if it's disability related, because those are legal obligations that those types of entities have. So a little bit more about civil actions that you might be able to pursue will come next, and Greg will talk about that. If we could go to the next slide, please.
Thank you, Christina. Now, as Christina talked about reporting, when a survivor of a hate crime or incident reports to law enforcement may investigate and determine whether a crime was committed. Law enforcement really takes the lead in that process, will determine if there are any charges and decide whether or not to prosecute. The survivors don't have a lot of participation or control over that process. But there is a way that they do have control, and that is to file a civil claim or an administrative claim with the Civil Rights Department if they suffer a hate crime or hate incident. Now, when it's in the civil context, working with the Civil Rights Department or a private lawyer, law enforcement is not involved in that civil aspect, so the survivors have much more control. One civil law that the Civil Rights Department enforces, and that can be the basis of filing a complaint or a lawsuit, is the Ralph Civil Rights Act. And it protects people from hate violence and threats of violence based on a person's identity. Again, those protected characteristics that we see on the screen there. So if a perpetrator commits a violent act or threatens to commit violence based on hate, if it's because of any of those 14 protected characteristics, that may violate the Ralph Civil Rights Act. Go to the next slide, please. Now, acts of hate that violate the Ralph Civil Rights Act require violence or threats of violence. So it's not like the earlier examples we saw where somebody maybe left a racist note or holds up an anti-Semitic sign. For violation of the Ralph Act, there needs to be a threat of violence or violence. And here we see some examples of violent acts or threats of violent acts that may violate the Ralph Act. And what you'll see there with those examples, that oftentimes a violent act that violates the Ralph Act could also violate criminal law. So you can do both things at the same time. Law enforcement could handle the criminal aspects, but survivors still have the opportunity to pursue their civil rights with the Civil Rights Department.
Greg, you're on mute.
Yeah, we lost you, Greg.
I'm sorry. Did we get through that slide, or did we lose me before that?
I think you pretty much got through this slide. I think you're good.
Next slide, please. Now, if somebody chooses to file an administrative complaint with the Civil Rights Department, this is the process that they would go through. Now, it's important to know that the department provides equal access to people with disabilities. If they contact us, there can be reasonable accommodations to make sure that they can get through the process. And it starts with filing an intake, and that can happen through the mail or via phone or online. And then a CRD representative will do an interview over the phone or in person if that's a better option. And then if a complaint is received, the Civil Rights Department will actually draft the complaint and then start the investigation. And throughout the process, they'll try to resolve the complaint with the perpetrator. And then at the end of the investigation, Civil Rights Department will make a determination whether the Ralph Act was violated or not. If so, then there could be mandatory mediation. And if mediation doesn't work, there could be a lawsuit filed by the Civil Rights Department. Or at any part during the process, the person can get their own lawyer and proceed without the Civil Rights Department. But we are here to help. It's free to do so, and there's a lot of support along the way. Next slide, please. Now, who are the folks that are liable under the Ralph Civil Rights Act? It would be the perpetrator who actually commits the act of violence or threatens to commit violence, any person that helps them or participates with them, and then also employers, landlords, business owners are responsible for the acts of their employees or agents. So if you walk into a business and somebody threatens you or somebody attacks you, the owner of the business could be liable. Next slide, please. And the remedies available for the violation of a Ralph Act include these remedies here. Reimbursement for actual losses. So if somebody suffers an attack, they can potentially get their medical bills paid. If they have to miss work because they're injured, they could get lost wages, compensation for emotional distress. And there's also non-monetary remedies available. When the Civil Rights Department brings a Ralph Act case, they're very focused on making sure that perpetrators don't do acts of hate or violence in the future. So they would demand that training would include in the remedies. And there could be posters posted in businesses or apartment buildings to educate people and hopefully stop the perpetrators from committing hate crimes again. Next slide, please. And lastly, as I said before, that while the Civil Rights Department is here to help and investigate cases, people can get their own attorney and go straight to court without coming to us first. And that is an option. While we talked about the Ralph Civil Rights Act, there is also other laws that protect people from hate acts. And you see here the California Bain Civil Rights Act, the Fair Employment and Housing Act, and there are federal acts as well. So it's important to talk with the Civil Rights Department or a community organization or an attorney that's knowledgeable in this area of law to understand the full breadth of your rights. I'd like to pass it back to Christina now to wrap up.
Thanks. Quickly, just kind of some final reflections. You do have options and rights, certainly if you are experiencing or the witness to a hate crime or a hate incident. Remember always that your physical safety, the physical safety of folks around you is the most important thing, and that you're not alone. There are government agencies, community groups, religious organizations, health organizations, and many others who are ready and able to support you. You can report hate crimes or hate incidents to local law enforcement, to the FBI, to California state agencies, or to community groups, again, if you feel comfortable and able to do so. And then certainly you have other civil options under the Ralph Civil Rights Act or other laws. Our last slide is just some information, how to contact the Civil Rights Department. You'll see there's an accommodations email there. You'll see there's a TTY number there. That's for folks with disabilities. And we thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Christina and Gregory. Thank you very much for that presentation. Just a gentle reminder that we will be taking public comment after the next presentation. The next presentation we have for you is resources available to people targeted for hate, and that will be presented by Becky Monroe and Marquez Equilibria. Becky Monroe is the Deputy Director of Strategic Initiatives and External Affairs. Before joining the CRD, Monroe worked for the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of the Associate Attorney General as a consultant, senior advisor. Before this, Monroe was the Senior Director of the Fighting Hate and Bias Program at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. She was Director and Distinguished Practitioner in Residence for the Divided Community Project at the Ohio State University College of Law from 2019 to 2020. Monroe was Director of the Stop Hate Project at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law from 2017 to 2018. She was Director on Policy and Strategy and Senior Counselor to the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights in the Civil Rights Division at the U.S. Department of Justice from 2012 to 2017. She earned her Juris Doctorate degree from Yale Law School and was a law clerk to the Honorable Richard A. Pies, Judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. Marquez Equilibria is Assistant Deputy Director for the Dispute Resolution Division, also known as Community Conflict Resolution Unit, also known as CREW. Prior to joining the Community Conflict Resolution Unit, Marquez spent the last 13 years in community conflict resolution at the Community Relations Service of the U.S. Department of Justice. Marquez also worked in community conflict resolution in the nonprofit sector. Marquez has an MA in conflict resolution from American University. Welcome, Becky and Marquez.
Thank you, Commissioner. And it's really, it's an honor to follow my colleagues, Gregory and Christina, to provide a little bit of information about the resources that are currently available to people targeted for hate in California. So we're going to go ahead and jump in. We can go to the next slide, please. You can go ahead and skip ahead. Great. So first, what I want to tell you about is a relatively new resource line and network. It was built, I will say at the outset, with the input of a lot of really great advocates, including actually somebody from the organization Mr. Solomons was representing from NOAA. And so I would just want to highlight that in California, we are really fortunate to have incredibly active civil rights groups across the state. So we built it in partnership with them. And then we want to talk about how we can help partners support this. So organizations, small, any kind of NGO, we can also work with city governments, other local governments, libraries and others, making sure we're providing resources to them to help the people that they serve. And then finally, my colleague Marquez is going to talk a little bit about the Community Conflict Resolution Unit. Next slide, please. So I was really grateful to our colleagues who provided the presentation before when providing a little bit of background on California versus hate. I will say that our work through California versus hate, this resource line and network that we've developed, is really modeled in many ways on what we learned from Stop AAPI Hate. We heard that people maybe don't feel safe coming to government at all. If they do, they don't feel safe coming to law enforcement. So we created a resource line and network meant to reflect what we learned from them. And we continue to work with them to make sure that we're actually doing a good job of serving all people who are targeted for hate. Next slide, please. So I wanted to sort of give you an overview of what we're trying to do with this. You may have seen in the graphic that we had, and what I will say is those graphics are available to everyone. So if you want to use them for your own organization, you can, and I'll share how to do that. But when you report their support, what we wanted to make clear is if people want to report acts of hate, we wanted to make it a safe place for them to report, and we wanted to sort of have it make a difference. One of the things you heard, I think, from our colleagues who presented earlier from Stop AAPI Hate was that one of the reasons people don't report is they don't think it will make a difference. They either think they will not get any additional support or help, or it won't actually help to combat hate. Part of what we do is if you call, you will learn options for next steps if you are targeted for hate. Another thing I wanted to highlight from Charles Jung, who actually also provided us with input at the very beginning of this process. one of the things we noted is that people want to know their options and all of their options. So if someone calls, we can explain. If you're interested in going to law enforcement and reporting, we can talk about what that process looks like and help you understand that. We've also been in cases where people have already reported or law enforcement responded and they wanted support in sort of understanding how to navigate that process. However, if you don't feel safe going to law enforcement for any reason, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you don't have to when you reach out to us. We can still provide you with additional support and additional options if you've been targeted for hate. One of the things we are doing is connecting people with culturally competent resources and support. We are working with a network of nonprofit and community-based organizations across the state. Within that network, we have grantees from the California Department of Social Services Stop the Hate Grant. We have organizations that provide in-language support around mental health issues, other social services issues, legal services, a whole host of resources, and we are connecting people with those resources. And when I say connect, I mean connect. So we do not just sort of say, here's 5 ideas and 5 organizations and good luck. We actually are fortunate to be working with, through the 211 network, we're working with care coordinators who are specifically trained in how to respond to people who've been targeted for hate, and we'll stay with you while you go through that process. So if we say, this organization may be able to provide you with legal services, would you like us to get on the phone with you to call and see if they can help? If you don't hear back from that organization, we can help to follow up. Finally, we are trying to improve hate incident and hate crime reporting and use that data to enhance our hate crimes prevention and response. We are looking forward to, and in about a month, we'll hear from the State Attorney General in California, who will provide hate crimes data that they receive from law enforcement agencies. That data is critical. The data we are talking about is different data. We're talking about data that people self-report. And they may report to us again, they may go online, they may call us. But part of why I want to make that distinction is that we think all of this data is important. By capturing data as reported by victims, we can get a more accurate understanding of sort of how people are feeling in California who are targeted. And we can also capture that data around hate incidents. That is one of the lessons we've learned, again, from Stop AAPI Hate, but we've also learned it from other agencies. So for example, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, they say, if you look at their model policy, they say it is a model to capture hate incident data. There is a recognition that capturing this kind of information, even if it doesn't rise to the level of a crime, is really important. So we are hoping to have another place where we can capture that data. We took to heart some advocates who said, we would like to live in a state where we can go to one source to find information about incidents and crimes. We would like to be in a state where people recognize that an act of hate that is either a hate incident that violates civil rights law or a hate incident that doesn't violate law but still causes harm is captured, because we know that that helps us to give resources to people. And then finally, one of the things I think is really important to note is that we provide ongoing training on cultural competence, and we're expanding our network regularly to include more culturally specific organizations. We understand that we will be hearing from people sometimes at points of crisis or sometimes in the days aftermath and in the aftermath of an act of hate. And it is really critical that our folks have the training to work respectfully with people and to make sure that we're actually able to provide the help that they need. Next slide, please. One of the things that we wanted to emphasize and we know is important is to provide in-language support. So if you go online to californiaversushate.org, you will see the form that is currently available in 15 languages, or you can call 833-8-NO-HATE, and there you can access services in 200 languages. By contract, the average waiting time should be no more than 3 minutes. That was one thing we heard, again, as we were building this in hundreds of conversations with advocates across the state. Make sure people don't have to wait too long if they do decide to call. And then finally, that 211 statewide network that we're working with does have trauma-informed agents and care coordinators who have done some of this work in the past. One of the things I also wanted to highlight here is that in addition to learning from our partners across the state who do this work in terms of community-based organizations, We learned a lot from our partners at the county level. The Los Angeles County Human Relations Commission and their work, LA versus Hate, was really groundbreaking in that it started years ago to provide these kinds of services and support to people in LA County. And we've learned a lot from them and their partnership with 211. The next slide, please. Just wanted to give folks a little bit of an explanation of what the process would look like. If you call, you have a short in-language processing for phone calls. So we'll have a shorter sort of conversation with people just to make sure we understand what the issue is. And if they would like additional support, we will follow up. We have found some people are calling and saying, I want to report that this happened. This is, you know, and this is my experience, and I want, and that's all I want to do. Some people do not want to leave their name. That's totally fine. They don't want to leave any information, and that's fine as well. Others do want to provide more information and contact information for follow-up. Again, it is up to the person who's been targeted, and that is really important for us to make sure we respect where people are coming from at that moment. And then finally, online, we have mobile-friendly intake portal. Again, it's a slightly shorter in-language portal. One of the things we will be hearing from advocates, I think, is you know, we're going to be we've built in a sort of accountability structure where we can hear from advocates. We haven't had our first meeting. We just had the official launch on May 4th. But when we do, we anticipate we will hear, how is it working for people that they represent? Are they able to access this line? Is the intake too long? What works better? Do you wish we had more information or we were capturing something else? And then again, if people ask for it, they will get a longer in-language follow-up call where we can provide care coordination. Next slide. And as I mentioned, we want to let people know what their options are for next steps. It could include civil or criminal legal action if they're interested in that. It also may not include either. It may just be offering access to social services support. And whenever possible, we really do try to connect with culturally competent community-based organizations. One of the things I wanted to mention, I think it was Dana from UCLA who mentioned earlier about disability rights. I think this is such an important message and something that we're trying to really think about in terms of how we conduct the intake and the follow-up. We are not going to ask people to identify what part of their identity was targeted for hate. As Dana mentioned, people with disabilities come across multiple communities. And so we want to make sure we're addressing any kind of, in whichever way someone is targeted for hate, we're going to address it. We are not going to ask people to sort of separate that part of their identity. We recognize people come to us with many different, with many different identities, and we want to make sure that we are respectful of all and that we are able to serve all. And I will also just say, as someone I've worked for about 20 years on civil rights issues, most of that on hate crimes issues, the points about sort of disability rights, and in particular people with disabilities who also happen to be a member of another community who are targeted for hate, we have to do more, and we are trying to do better to make sure we're serving those needs. Next slide, please. I just wanted to kind of, again, do a shout out a little bit to LA versus Hate and provide sort of the way and the history of the context for how we developed this program and what we learned from them. And again, if you're in LA County, you have the option to go to LA County. You can go just through 211. And outside of LA County, or even inside LA County, you can go to California versus Hate. But they are really true partners in this work, and we're grateful to LA County for that. Next slide. One of the things I thought we wanted to make sure we emphasize is that people can report anonymously. They can choose to share additional information. The other thing I want to put in here, and this is something, again, that was raised in the really fantastic presentation from Stop AAPI Hate, is that we understand people trust community-based organizations. They trust their synagogues, they trust their mosques, they trust their churches, they trust their LGBTQ centers, they may not trust us. So part of what you can do as well is if you go to one of those organizations or another institution, we can serve as a resource to that institution. If you don't feel safe coming to us, we need to earn that. We understand that. But we can serve as a resource, for example, to those institutions and to those organizations. And so it's another step where if someone really doesn't even feel safe calling and not sharing their name, but they want to go somewhere else and have them reach out to us, that's fine as well. And again, whether or not someone reports anonymously, their identity will not be disclosed without their permission. And the exception would be to non-disclosure is if a report is made of child abuse, elder abuse, or activities indicating an imminent risk of violence, or unless otherwise required by law. The next slide, please. This is the part where I'm hoping to hear more from many of the groups on this call, including some who've already spoken. We are setting up an infrastructure where we can have ongoing input and accountability. We had our official launch on May the 4th, but we know that we're just getting started. So that means we need contracts with community-based organizations that will help us to sort of hold people accountable, ourselves accountable in particular, about whether things are accessible. We'll have regular community feedback sessions. We'll have regular civil rights leader feedback sessions on a quarterly basis. We'll be setting those up soon. And this network development. So we really want to make sure the network serves the people that we need to serve. We were fortunate, in addition to receiving funds from the state, we received a federal grant. And we're using some of that federal grant money to make sure we are doing a better job of reaching Black Californians. You saw from Professor Levin's presentation that we know anti-Black hate crimes have always been the #1 hate crime in our state and across the country. And so we want to do a better job and make sure we're actually reaching communities. And through the federal contract, we'll be working with California Black Media to help make sure that we're actually reaching all of the communities that we need to reach. And that may mean them telling us, you don't have enough providers who provide culturally competent services to our communities. The other thing I just want to flag about that work is that we will, one of the things we really value about California Black Media is they have for a long time recognized that we cannot combat any hate without combating all hate. So they are very strong partners in bringing together people of different religions, different backgrounds, people who speak different languages to make sure we're speaking with one voice. And again, we did put this separate 8338 number intentionally because we wanted to make sure we could have a short wait time if people trusted in us enough to call. Next slide. I also just wanted to highlight, we've got some amazing grantee partners who are working through the California Department of Social Services, so CDSS. They have a fantastic Stop the Hate direct service program. We've been working in partnership with them. You can see all of the organizations that are part of that network. They may provide mental and health services, wellness and community healing, legal services, and help with navigating all these different sort of options. So all of those grantees are a part of our network as well. We have tremendous partners at CDSS. We work with them regularly to make sure that we are adequately providing services and that we are reaching out to all the communities that we need to reach. Next slide, please. There are also prevention grantees. So we also have these folks in our network. Again, they provide some of the important work. One of the things we often hear from communities is, what are you doing to prevent hate? What are you doing around education? I think we heard some of this from Mr. Solomons earlier. Arts and cultural work, youth development, cross-racial alliance work. So they've got grantees that are all doing this work in our state with support from CDSS. Next slide. And then they have intervention folks, so people who can come in to help with restorative justice. This may speak to a little bit what we heard from Candace, a desire for more options outside the criminal legal system. Outreach and training, coordination with government and institutional partners, and coordinated regional rapid response. Next slide. I also, before I jump into this, because I want to make sure people know about partner resources, the other partner we have at the state level who we work with very closely is the state library. And I think another thing you heard from Stop AAPI Hate was the importance of including ethnic media outlets, and the state library has a Stop the Hate ethnic media grant program. We work very closely with them. They are doing a great job of getting the word out through different outlets. This is the piece I wanted to let people know. If you are an advocate, an organization, a local government, and you want to sort of share information about these resources and elevate something in the aftermath of an act of hate where people know where to get help, if you go to caversushate.org, you can find social graphics, posters, other information. You can customize it. You can put your city's name on there. You can change, we tried to make this as accessible as possible for other agencies and other organizations to use. Next slide. Next, we're going to hear from my colleague, Marquez Equilibria, who we are really fortunate to have recruited over to the Civil Rights Department, who's going to talk a little bit about options from the Community Conflict Resolution Unit.
Thanks, Becky. The Community Conflict Resolution Unit, as you can see there, the mission is to promote peaceful relations by assisting communities experiencing fear, conflict, or tensions relating to discriminatory practices, hate incidents, or hate crimes that have a community impact. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the history of the unit. Next slide, please. So our history starts in 1980, where the laws created the ability for, then called the Department of Fair Employment, created the ability for the department to engage in peacemaking activities. But it wasn't until July 2022 that the unit was funded through June of 2025 for 3 positions. And now let me tell you a little bit about the jurisdiction, how it's composed, and what kind of work it does. Next slide. So in terms of the jurisdiction, what's unique about CREW, as we like to call ourselves, the Community Conflict Resolution Unit, is that our services have to be requested or initiated by communities or state or local bodies. So an organization or any kind of community conflict, we have to have someone there present requesting our services. And there may be cases where the organizations present may not know who we are, but that is where outreach is very important, where we can contact them, inform them of the Community Conflict Resolution Unit so that they can then be in a position to request our services. Also very important to note that the conflict must be related to, communities in dispute, disagreements, or difficulties. We're working with community groups, not individuals. There are different, government agencies for individuals. We deal with community conflict. And as part of that, it is community conflict arising from discriminatory practices threatening peaceful community relations. If it is a community conflict according to one person, but we assess it and we don't see a community conflict, then we may figure out, well, what are some next steps, referrals. But there may be situations where there may be advocacy groups, there may be other organizations that are important to talk to and figure out, hey, are you seeing a conflict in this space? So it's very important to do an assessment of a conflict to figure out, what might be the next steps. Next slide, please. In terms of who we work with anyone who is a group. So here's a little bit more of whom that might be. So these might be nonprofit organizations, government agencies at the local, county, state, and federal level. These might be schools, school districts. So we might be working with the superintendent, the principal. These might be religious organizations. They might be demonstration groups, people who are organizing groups of people to protest. These might be human relation commissions. You also have them as human rights organizations or any kind of human relations body. We have law enforcement, of course, the sheriff departments in various different counties that we can work with. It can be any other kind of law enforcement agency as well. We have tribal groups, elected officials, and anybody who is directly impacted by a community conflict. Next slide. So something important to note about our standards of practice, that we are neutral and an impartial resource. That means we're not there to assign blame. We're not there to take sides or play favorites. We're there to provide services in a neutral, impartial manner. Otherwise, communities would not trust us. And the same thing with the confidential piece. Communities would not feel safe about coming to us to raise some of their concerns that they're seeing if they knew that the information that we learn about them or the conversations we have with them will be shared with somebody else. So we are neutral and impartial, but we also hold that information confidential. That means we don't share with other government agencies who might be interested or maybe contact us. But that also means that the Civil Rights Department, who also engages in investigating cases and enforcing cases, that means they can also not ask us, hey, what did you talk about when you spoke with, the groups that you're engaged with? That information is kept confidential. So again, lastly, to reemphasize that impartiality, we do not have law enforcement power. So we do not conduct investigations or bring lawsuits or carry weapons. Next slide. Now, in terms of the services we provide, so we design conflict resolution processes. This is how we do our work. This means that we might design an entire process, say after a city experiences a hate incident or a hate crime, or maybe issues related to police community relations as examples. And a city says to us, hey, we're really interested in designing some kind of town hall or some kind of event where we can listen to people and not just listen to their concerns, but also try to figure out, can we get recommendations from our communities? And can we do this in a structured way where we can have productive conversations, have next steps, subcommittees and whatnot? Sure, absolutely. We can design different options. Are we going to have a lot of people? Should we do breakout sessions? Do we want to then have to do various group facilitators, small group facilitators? And do we have to train them, or are they mediators? Figuring out all the details, the questions, the sequence of the questions, and figuring out the different steps involved. Then we have facilitating community engagement processes. Now that refers to either facilitating those processes that I just mentioned to you, or facilitating community meetings. There may be cases where we're just trying to figure out the first step in a situation, and we may be meeting with government officials, community leaders, and we're trying to figure out we've never had this kind of case or issue before, so what do we do? Can you facilitate the meeting? Absolutely, not a problem. So we could certainly facilitate a long-term process, or more of a first time. Hey, this is just a meeting to try to figure out what next steps to take. Next, we have education and training. So that is where we think about, what kind of capacity building we want to develop to help the communities that we're working with. And as I mentioned earlier, we were created last year, so we're still in the final steps of finalizing some of those work products. We're working on microaggressions training, what is not a hate crime training, a de-escalation guide, an intro to conflict resolution. So we certainly have a few products, and we're certainly interested in hearing from you all, what kind of training you believe would be of need, what would be useful for the communities that could potentially, partner with us and work with us. Next, we have technical consultations. That's where we provide technical feedback to community groups that may be developing their own process, and they just want some feedback on what they are constructing, developing in response to a situation. Could be like a hate crime response mechanism, or how to provide more capacity to schools to respond, or some kind of hate crime plan, how to respond. So it could be various different jurisdictional topics that we engage in. And lastly, we have mediating community disputes, and that's where community groups can ask for a more formal, structured process where we can mediate between them to help them find solutions to their problems. It's very, very important to mention all of our services are free of charge, no cost to the people requesting our services. Next slide. So a few more examples to kind of show you what our services look like. I've kind of already mentioned the first one in terms of design. What does a design service look like? If a city asks for a town hall, we can help them design it and facilitate it. Now, next we have design and facilitation. So this is one where, let's say they do ask us for facilitation, but in the top one, we can always design it and the city leaders can facilitate it themselves. In the second one, a city has asked us to facilitate meetings where historic residents of color have been profiled and had the police called on them by a new wave of residents moving into the city. And maybe in that one, community leaders say, that we've never handled that kind of, conflict. It's a little more complex. We'd feel more comfortable if you facilitate it. Sure. Technical consultation, say a school wants our perspective after a student or staff member posted hate-related materials on social media. They may share with us some of the next steps they're engaged in, what they're planning to do, and they want our feedback into that process where we can add to it and ask them, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Well, here's something we could do for you, and we can work on this particular piece. So we could certainly work with schools in responding to a hate-related incident. Next slide. Another technical consultation example, developing contingency plans with community groups and law enforcement to prevent physical violence in response to a hate group that plans to march and protest in the city. So say a known hate group decides to visit your town and they want to march and exercise their rights. There are certain ways to try and prevent violence. Sometimes counter protests find out and they decide that they're going to organize a huge response to this group. And so that means that you're now going to have two potential sides on the ground who may be facing off. How can you prevent, this from escalating into physical violence? And one way is to work with community leaders and law enforcement to ensure that there are contingency plans to prevent that. There are a lot of ways this can go sideways, and so we can certainly work with those community leaders and law enforcement to try and prevent that. Lastly, education and training. So human relations commissions can ask us to help them prepare or strengthen their ability to respond to incidents of hate. So we can certainly work with them to have stronger plans and so they can expedite their ability to respond to various issues that happen in their city in the future. Next. So this is how you can get to our website on the bottom. And of course, we have contact information and web links for the Stop the Hate resource line and network. One thing to note about our conflict resolution unit is you can use that link to get you there. There is a tab on the left-hand side that says Community Conflict Resolution Unit. So you still have to click on that to get you to our page. And now I would like to turn it back to our commissioners.
Thank you so much, Marquez and Becky, for that presentation. So next we're going to be going into public comment. So we'll pass it over to Commissioner Filer.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Cuellar. Thank you again, the CCR unit. That was terrific. So we're going to open it up to public comment. Just a reminder, the questions and comments should be related to the last presentations, and it should be limited to 3 minutes. Do we have any public comment or questions?
Does not look like it. No public comment at this time.
Okay. Do we have any written comments?
We have no written public comment.
Okay. All right. So let me pass it back to Commissioner Cuellar.
Okay, well, thank you so very much, Commissioner Filer. With that, we're going to go ahead and move to agenda item number 4, and that's going to be facilitating a public comment and discussion. So the goals of the public comment today are really, we want to listen and learn. That's the most important, and we want to hear from you, you and what your community is in need of. That will really help us guide us into making those much needed recommendations to the governor, the legislature, and other governments. The foundation and the work of the commission is really driven by community input. So I encourage your participation, your stories, and your ideas. We want to hear from you. If you don't feel comfortable speaking up in the forum, you can also email the commission at csh@calcivilrights.ca.gov, and we'll make sure that goes in the chat again, just to make sure. And I'd like to just hand it back over to Assistant Deputy Director Marquez Equilibria. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cuellar. As Commissioner Cuellar and Filer have emphasized, this is a space to continue hearing from the public and to elicit your input into different areas of interest related to the mission of the commission to provide further guidance to the commission's direction. Your input is vital, and to additionally assist the commission, we have a few questions we would like your perspective on. Also note that for this section, I may have follow-up questions for any member of the public that may have provided information that can be further elaborated on to ensure that the commission has a clear understanding of the input you have provided. So let's get started. We have the questions up on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and read them as well. What are the barriers to reporting hate that you have experienced? What are the barriers to accessing resources and support? Are you able to access culturally competent resources and support? If you or someone you know has been targeted for hate, what was an example of a response from government or a community-based organization or a religious institution that you thought was helpful and effective? Or what was an example that was not helpful or effective? And what are the issues that you would like to see addressed in future public forums? We will open it up to comments from and input from the public. Again, this is very important for us to hear from you all if you have any input on these questions. Okay, we have a hand. ING staff. Go ahead and unmute. We can hear you.
Thank you for receiving my comments again. And this is Zachary Markwith, Deputy Director at Islamic Networks Group. I'd like to address the last question. What are the issues you would like to see addressed in future public forums? I was very pleased to see the presentation on how civil rights can protect Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and would like to recommend a future presentation on Islamophobia and its impact on Muslims, Sikhs, and other Americans, which ING is happy to offer. We've spoken on Islamophobia and its impact and how to counter it to schools, universities, healthcare facilities, and law enforcement and government agencies, including to the U.S. Department of Education and the California Department of Education. So thank you so much for kindly considering my proposal.
Thank you. Anybody else?
It appears that there's no other public comment.
Any written? Oh, we have a hand. Greg Desir.
Concerning reports to law enforcement from people with disabilities, there are multiple barriers. One is that people have tried to report in the past and been ignored and are reasonably convinced that nothing's going to happen if they report. Another is that law enforcement often looks at it as a civil matter, doesn't want to take a criminal report. Another barrier is that the perpetrator is in many cases the caregiver or person in authority, and the victim is quite reasonably frightened that nothing will happen and that they'll be retaliated against. and of course the biggest or other barriers are that if someone has a communications disability or a mental disability of any sort, dementia, intellectual disability, mental illness, that they may be very difficult for them to report.
Greg, you mentioned the barriers. In terms of solutions, is there anything you would offer for next steps for the commission to engage in to try and address some of these barriers?
Yes, there's legislation pending that would concerning crimes against elders and people with disability that would require every law enforcement agency to have a policy with including protocols that would require that every officer be trained that in dealing with these kinds of cases, that every law enforcement agency have a specialized unit or a small agency, at least a specialized officer who can serve as a resource, and that that training and that resource train officers to respond more appropriately. It would also require the resource specialist to reach out to community groups in the case of disabilities, disability groups, to try to assure people that they will be listened to.
Great. Thank you. Any other participants who wish to provide input on any of these questions?
Looks like there is no more public comment.
Okay. Going once, going twice. All right, I will pass it back to our commissioners for the next agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marquez, and thank you for all those comments. And we will, like I said, we will definitely take those back to the commission. So next we'll be moving on to agenda item number 4, public comment on items not on the agenda. Please keep in mind that the commission may not discuss or act on any matter raised during the public comment section that is not included on this agenda, except whether to decide to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. Okay. And we'll pass it over to Commissioner Filer.
Okay, I'd like you to open it up to public comment or questions on items that are not on the agenda. Again, just reminding everyone that it's limited to a 3-minute time. So are there any public comments or questions?
Yeah, I see one. Surveyor, you're on.
Okay, thank you. I think you may be on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
now we
hi.
can.
I'm Sravya. I'm with Hindus for Human Rights. We're a national organization focused on addressing Hindu nationalism and caste. And I just want to bring awareness to an issue of hate that we're seeing in California. A lot of you may be familiar with SB 403, which is being introduced to help add caste as a protected category. And in response to this bill being introduced, which will do huge, amazing work in protecting people in California who are from oppressed caste groups, unfortunately, a lot of right-wing folks who believe in this ideology of Hindu nationalism and groups like the Hindu American Foundation and, you know, other folks have been attacking a lot of Dalit and other oppressed caste people for supporting this legislation, for supporting their rights to live without caste discrimination in their lives. And in addition, something else we've been seeing in California is Hindu nationalist groups also attacking Muslims at community events. For example, there was an Independence Day parade back in August in Los Angeles, and you know, Hindutva groups were yelling at protesters, even engaging in physical violence and pushing. So I just kind of want to just raise it to awareness. Of course, like I am a Hindu. As a Hindu, you know, the whole Hindu community is not responsible for this, but there is a faction of Hindus who, you know, are not necessarily supporting human rights for all people. And this is an extension of some issues going on in India, and trying to kind of carry out supremacy over other groups is just an issue that I want you all to be aware of. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Appreciate you being here. Are there any other comments, public comments or questions?
There's no other verbal public comment.
Okay, are there any written comments?
No written comments. Oh, wait, 1 second. No, I don't believe so. No written comment.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to hand it back then to Commissioner Cuellar.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and thank you for your comments. And we will be moving into our last agenda item, which is agenda item number 6, adjournment. So I will be handing that back off to Commissioner Filer. Thank you so much.
Right. Well, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you to all our exceptional presenters, and thank you to the public who was with us at this first forum. And I want to remind everyone that we really do want your feedback. It's critical for us for the work we're going to do on the commission. So if you weren't comfortable speaking at this forum, please reach out to us, and hopefully you'll be able to make our next forum. And thank you, everyone, and we are adjourned.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for being part of it. Have a great weekend.